everyone, and welcome to another edition of A Changing Guyana, where the change you seek begins with you. Before we get started, I'd like to remind our listeners that they can also follow this show on YouTube. And you're also invited to call in with questions for me or tonight's guests on the number flashing on the TV screens. Tonight we have a very special guest, Mr. Rob Strong. I think this is Rob's seventh trip to Guyana, so he's no stranger to Guyana's delicious foods, welcoming people, and a vibrant future. Welcome, Rob.
Thank you very much.
Before we begin, I must share with all of you Rob's illustrious background. Rob Strong's business career was grounded in retail management. He owned and operated small businesses in St. John's from 1977 to 1980. He applied his fundamental expertise in a range of business development activities in most major petroleum producing jurisdictions. He has extensive knowledge and broad understanding of the public and private infrastructure required to support exploration, development, production, and general logistics within the petroleum industry. Additionally, he has close working relationships in the marine aspects of petroleum jurisdictions around the globe, from the North Sea to the Gulf of Mexico and Canada's east and west coasts. Mr. Strong served as national co-chair of Trade Team Canada Oil and Gas Equipment and Services. He has provided leadership for Canadian supply and service companies in international trade and guided East Coast Canada export activities. Mr. Strong is a longtime committee board and executive member of the Newfoundland Oil and Gas Industries Association, NOIA. He was recognized on several occasions for his lasting contribution to the establishment and growth of Newfoundland and Labrador's oil and gas industry. Mr. Strong is actively involved in professional organizations, including the predominant oil and gas industry linkage, the Newfoundland and Labrador Oil and Gas Industry Association, and is a former director and president of that organization. He has served as president of the St. John's Oilfield Technical Society and was a member of the Canadian Offshore Resources Exposition Advisory Council. Mr. Strong is a past chair of the Oil and Gas Committee of Newfoundland and Labrador Oil and Gas Industries. He has served as chair of Oil and Gas Week Committee jointly sponsored by CAPP and NOIA. He was also instrumental in the establishment of Guyana Oil and Gas Association, what we call GOCA. You were here not so long ago, Rob. What brings you back to Guyana so quickly?
Oh, I think the exciting market that Guyana represents when you think about all the jurisdictions in the world, this is not literally hot, figuratively hot, or vice versa. This is an exciting place to be, and this time I'm part of a delegation from Canada, based from Newfoundland on the east coast, that are down here to talk to Guinea's companies about potential joint ventures. So I'm part of that delegation, which was supported by the government of Canada and also by in Guyana by the businesses or the associate with whatever the business
The Ministry of Business, I
Ministry
think.
of Business and Go Invest.
Correct, correct.
So it's a pleasure to be back for sure and to see how things are developing.
Okay, okay. How was the group? What's the group success like in this trip?
We had a mixed variety of various disciplines. We had some marine people, some fabrication people, we have some testing people, we have some modern chemical people. So we have a wide variety of disciplines with us. And as far as I can determine, because it's only day two or day three of the mission, everybody seems to be quite happy with the amount of market intelligence we're getting, and equally important, the chance to interface with companies in Guyana that might want to work with us in joint venture possibilities.
I see, I see. Now, are you looking at assisting businesses with funding, or how are those partnerships formed?
Oh, there's a variety of methods, but really it's same what we did in Newfoundland 40 years ago. We turned, in our particular case, we turned to Norway because the technology is used offshore Newfoundland We're predominantly Norwegian. But, the transfer of technology, the joint venturing route, some of our companies have done it before, and they're hoping to take that experience and transfer it to Guyanese companies because everybody recognizes, including Exxon, that there's a desire to maximize local content, and that's not a foreign thing in Newfoundland. When although we had a lot of sort of Norwegian companies and Scottish companies come to Newfoundland, the bottom line is that maximum new local content wherever possible. So our companies are here to meet with Guyanese companies to transfer a bit of that technology and form joint ventures, but with the ultimate game of maximizing Guyanese content.
I see, I see.
And that's Exxon's wish.
Oh,
That's a very strong wish of Exxon. I've had a couple of presentations and meetings with Exxon, and their desire is to do as much as possible that they can in Guyana to support the 5 potential FPSOs offshore.
well, that's great to know because, I mean, if you speak to the person on the street, you get mixed messages. I mean, there are people on one side saying Exxon is here to help, and the other side, people are saying not so much. But it's good that you can help us to really understand that Exxon
Yeah, I mean,
does have a plan, and that plan
Exxon
includes
operates
helping us.
all over the world. They're a world-class player, and they strongly encourage, as they did in Newfoundland, they strongly encourage the transfer of technology. They strongly encourage the education system to educate people from Guyana about some of the opportunities and some of the challenges. So this transfer of technology and this desire for the maximizing of local content is happens all over the world with Exxon,
Okay, okay.
and it makes sense. It
Of
makes
course.
sense if your FPSOs are only 140 miles away. It makes sense to service out of Guyana, not out of Houston, not out of Trinidad, not out of Brazil, and certainly not out of the east coast of Canada. We're a long way away.
I agree. I agree. Uh, Recognizing that you guys were here last year, I want to openly thank the provinces of Labrador and Newfoundland for the proactive stance that they've taken in coming to Guyana and trying to partner with Guyanese and helping them understand what they need to do to be able to be part of this new developing sector. Um, I also understand that there are challenges within that process. Can you share with us what some of those challenges are?
Well, first, the Newfoundland Labrador business community gets tremendous support from our government agencies. In our case, of course, it might be the government of Canada or the government of Newfoundland. But they encourage, they support, they add financial incentives to help us, to help us. And this is why we're here. I'm hoping that and obviously I don't live in Guyana, and although I've been here 5 or 6 times, I don't claim to speak for the government, but I would hope that the government of Guyana looks at the example of Newfoundland to encourage Guyanese companies to learn, because this is a very technical industry. This is and the commitment to safety, which Exxon is a world leader, I might add. But I would hope that your government and your educational institutions would work hard to see that the Guyanese companies learn about this industry, because it's going to be around for a long time. The world is not running out of oil. Uh, you have some phenomenal resources offshore, and I think you've only scratched the surface. But it's an evolutionary thing. You're not going to get 100% Guyanese companies content up front. It takes time to transfer the technology, to educate, to learn, to serve on platforms and supply vessels. So any expectation that you'll have 100% Guyanese content by 2021, 2022, you're not going to have it. It just takes a long time. So you start at the bottom and you sort of people work on rigs and they move up and they move up and they move up until they get into management positions. But it's because of the technical nature of the business. It's going to take time.
I see, I see. You just mentioned something that we pretty much just scratched the surface. Now, I've heard Exxon say it, and a lot of other companies inside and outside of Guyana say it, that this find is a significant find. How significant is this find relative to other finds?
Oh, it's you know, when I started 40 years ago, if we had one discovery in 10 tries, that was good. In recent times, because of different technology, particularly seismic, 1 in 5 is an excellent track record. Down here, you've got, I think, an 82% success rate. I think you've drilled a total of 10 wells and 8 are discoveries, so it's pretty significant for sure.
Well, understanding that we've got all of this oil coming, I think that in my estimation, one of the most critical things is that we are prepared for this. So it leads me into my next question. In your estimation, how prepared do you think we are as a government and as a people for this?
It's early days. As I said earlier, you can't expect 100% Guinea's content. I don't know enough about your educational institutions. I know back in Canada, our educational institutions develop programs and courses to help educate our students or our graduates. So you're early days. You really are early days. You're not going to get first production until 2020. We've been producing oil in Newfoundland since 1997. So we've had lots of time to get educated and learn the technologies and develop the infrastructures needed. So whereby you may not be where you think you'd like to be, you'll get there. It just takes time.
I see, I see. Yes, it's the early days, but I think for a lot of people, especially companies, I think this is the time to prepare. So, how do you recommend that we prepare for this at this point?
Well, I think companies in Guyana must look at their core strengths. If they're in logistics, well, then you look towards the logistical requirements of platform. Whether you're in fabrication, I mean, you can't be all things to all people. And you stick to the knit. Well, we say stick to the knitting. Stick to what you know something about and expand on that knowledge and see how it is applicable to offshore development. So my advice, for what it's worth, and again, I'm a stranger in your country, so I may miss things, but my advice to Guinea's companies is to build upon their strengths. If you're a crane company or you're a logistic company or you have lands for supply bases or you're a fabrication, see how that fits in or how you fit in the whole what we call the supply chain. One of the dangers we made, or one of the mistakes we made in the early days of trying to be all things to all people. Well, that doesn't work. You have to develop some core strengths in your own discipline. So that would be my advice to a lot of the Guineas companies is look at what you do best and build upon that.
Now, I'm assuming that that includes training,
Very
seeing
much so.
that this is new to a lot of people. Um, how do you? What's best? What's the best way to implement that training
Well, it's a,
from the experience that you guys have in laboratory problem?
it's a multi-pronged thing. Obviously, formal training in educational institutions, universities, trade schools, welding schools, whatever. Uh, that's one way to start. And then, I mean, I know guys who started out on rigs in the lowest position, what we call roughnecks or roustabouts. And over the years, they're able to build up and build up and build up. And they're now drillers or they're tool pushers, which is one of the highest positions. So it's, as I keep saying, it's an evolutionary thing. Start at a basic level, but get the education. One thing that I would stress, Andy, is that from what I've seen, is the need for people to think about safety. Offshore is dangerous work. You're out in the middle of the ocean. It's highly technical. So you have to go to work every morning with a think safety mentality. This is critical, whether it's Exxon or Chevron or BP or Shell. We as an industry want to work safe. And I think that's a big area where Guyanese companies need some help, need to start thinking about safety. I mean, I've been in fabrication yards or machine shops where I don't see a hard hat. I don't see safety boots. Well, that's not acceptable. Working in an unsafe environment doesn't work. So you have to immediately start thinking about safety, safety, safety. Companies have, every morning we have what we call a toolbox. So you talk about the things you're going to do that day, and you think about how to do it safe. Safety is key to any operation. And I know from personal experience that Exxon, you think safe. You have safety meetings, you have shop talks, you have hazard identification meetings, and you talk to the people, but in the back of your mind, how do I do that job safely? If I can't do it safely, you don't do it.
Correct, correct. I've been part of I'm a retired member of the U.S. Coast Guard, and it's the same. I mean, when you are at sea, safety comes first always, and I'm hoping that that industry really blossoms in Guyana because that safety in Guyana is necessary not just out at sea, but within companies within Georgetown itself or within the continental Guyana itself. Um, what about pending challenges that you see in your submission you're going to have to deal with what's coming?
I think that one of the big challenges is what we call ISO, International Standards Organization. It's basically ISO certification shows your client, whether it's Exxon or one of their one of their tier one contractors, that you're doing it right. Documentation, traceability.
You're back live with Rob Strong and Andrew Austin on the Changing Guyana. Just before we left, Rob, I started asking you about the government here and what can be done. Let me ask this question. If you were able to direct Guyana's government through these developmental stages, what would you say to them?
As you know, I'm a visitor to this country, so I don't profess to offer government too much advice because. But my suggestion rather than direction is that government ensure that the educational institutions are prepared, have the right training programs in place, that they support the development of technology, perhaps support new equipment coming in to better equip Guyanese companies with the proper tools, the proper machines, the proper testing, and so on. So it's really a basket of suggestions I would make, and again, rather than direct the government, but training is critical, infrastructure is critical, education is critical. I mean, there's no rocket science in saying that any government, be it the government of Guyana or the government of Newfoundland, which did it for us 40 years ago, to devote as many resources as you can to this whole aspect of training the population, of helping with infrastructure. So it's, that'd be my advice for what it's worth, but it's something that goes on all over the world, Andrew. And I started going to Norway back in 79, 77. Government played a big role in the education of the people. And now, of course, in a country like Norway has so much exportable technology. You find now Norwegian technology applicable in Brazil, just around the corner from here, or the U.S. Gulf or the Far East. But in the early days, it was a matter of the government finding the resources, and that's a challenge, obviously, in a country like Guyana that's not flush with cash. But even finding the resources to educate your population, to enhance the technologies, that's critical.
There are ways actually to achieve or obtain the funds that you need, especially at this early part of the sector. Can you share with us what some of those options might be?
Well, the again, what our government did, and I'll share that experience, is that our government in the early days took us by the hand or led delegations of Newfoundland business people to the North Sea, whether it was Scotland, whether it was Norway, so we could actually see and touch and feel and smell what happens. It's fine to look in a textbook and look at pictures and look at videos, but there's nothing better than standing on a fabrication floor and watching someone weld a subsea component, or going to a heliport and seeing how helicopter operations work, or going on a vessel as an AB, and something you'd understand.
Sure, sure.
Something so it's combine it with the formal education. I would like to see, and again, it's not my call, but I would like to see your government doing a bit more of that, identifying some key businesses and taking them to jurisdictions. It's fine for us to come down here and talk about our business, but I would love to see your businesses coming up to Newfoundland and actually seeing the work being done. That's something that, if I was in government, which I'm not, but that's something I would strongly encourage. That there's nothing better than taking a weller from Guyana and taking him up to Newfoundland and seeing how we weld, and the degree of sophistication and the degree of quality. Quality is paramount. And as I keep returning to, the degree of safety that we practice in Newfoundland, and that you're going to have to do it in Guyana.
Is there facilities in place to allow that if Guyanese wanted to come
Oh,
up to
sure.
Newfoundland?
Sure, I mean, I can't speak for the government, but I can speak for the people involved in this mission. They would love to see the people they're talking to now. We would love to see them come up and actually see what we're talking about, to touch the welding rod, or to look at the pressure vessels or the gauges, or see non-destructive testing. It's fine to talk about it, but you can't beat it. You can't beat seeing it.
Absolutely, absolutely. I know that an MOU was just signed recently between the Ministry of Business and the province of Labrador, Newfoundland. What does that entail?
Well, it's early days. It's certainly a commitment on both governments to work closely together. Initially, of course, I think that Guyana needs to understand the regulatory regime, the activities that go on in monitoring this industry. And of course, from that, we hope, as I say, to see that this MOU fosters visitations from companies in Guyana to Newfoundland. Newfoundland and Guyana have a trading relationship that goes back hundreds of years. Salt fish from my country, rum from your country.
Correct,
But we
correct.
have and Canada is Canada and Guyana, the Canadian High Commission here, is very strong on building relationships between Canada and Guyana. So I'd like to see more activity vis-a-vis exchanging ideas, but also people traveling. and seeing how we do it.
Is there going to be the establishment of a facility here um, in terms of a structure, a building and additional people here to facilitate that transfer of knowledge and ideas?
I don't think that's the intent of the MOU, a physical building, if that's what you're asking.
Correct,
I
correct.
think the intent is to open up doors to learn from each other. And in this case, Guyana learns from Newfoundland. And again, it's the same thing we did 40 years ago when I started, which I was only a little boy 40 years ago. But that's what we did. We went overseas to Norway and Scotland primarily, and some came to the U.S. Gulf. That's that's a meaningful activity as part of the whole process of training your workforce to do the jobs, because this is a highly technical industry, and as I said earlier, you're 140 miles out in the middle of the ocean. You're pumping oil out of the ground. You want to do it safely, so you want to make sure that your crews are well trained.
If I were a Guyanese citizen, and I am, but I'm speaking for the other Guyanese citizens who might be looking at tonight's show, with no experience in the oil and gas industry, what would be your advice to me if I wanted to become involved in the industry?
Read, 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 and read. Trade magazines. Your mind is like a sponge in this industry, and you never stop learning. So the first thing, obviously, is to educate yourself about the industry. And maybe you listen. Maybe you're not. Maybe maybe you don't have to. Maybe you don't want to get involved in the industry, and that's fine too. I mean, this is the industry is not the salvation of society, either in your country or my country. So you want to make sure that you want to get in the industry. That's the first thing. And are you properly educated? And do you have the necessary skills? Because not everybody has the skills to be a drilling engineer on an offshore platform. So it's understanding the industry and deciding in your own mind where do you want to fit into it, and then education, experience, that sort of thing.
I see, I see. We as a country are now in the developmental stages of this local content policy. How important is local content contract to the country's development?
I think it's critical, and it's I mean it's, as I said earlier, 140 miles off the coast, so it makes practical sense to do business with Guyana. And I think from what I've seen, I think that's Exxon's philosophy too, is they want to maximize. It just makes sense. Besides politically and morally, it makes sense to have a well-trained local support community. So it's critical. It's critical for the oil companies, whether it's in this case Exxon, maybe Total or Tullow or Echo or CGX or Repsol or all the companies that are interested. Uh, They want to do it. There's no downside to it. There's no downside to it. It makes practical sense. It makes economic sense, and it makes political sense to maximize local content.
Now, we are about 2 years into the fine, and we're still working on our policy. How did Newfoundland institute their policy, and how quick did they get that on board?
Our situation was a little bit different. We had a jurisdictional battle between the government of Canada and the government of Newfoundland as to who would be the principal beneficiary. So that took a while. But once the piece of legislation called the Atlantic Accord was proclaimed in the Parliament of Canada and the Parliament of Newfoundland, we were ready to go. So it you're going from nothing. You're going from no oil, no experience, no oil industry. You, there's a danger of creating false expectations. in the business community or the general population. And people have to realize this is I keep returning to it, this is a highly technical, complicated industry. So it's going to take a while to develop a comprehensive local benefits policy. Because there's no sense having a local benefits policy if it's not going to work. It's fine to say that Mr. Exxon or Mr. Chevron or Mr. Trudeau or Mr. Toad, you must do this, you must do this, you must do this. Oil companies want to do things in a very safe manner. So there's no sense imposing regulations that don't make sense because you don't want an accident to happen. I'll give you a specific example of where one of the mistakes that we made with respect to local content. In 1982, there was a rig called the Ocean Ranger, big rig, one of the biggest rigs in the world, drilling off our coast in the middle of winter, February 15th. Seas were running 60 feet, wind was blowing 100 miles an hour, snow was coming at it, and we had a person in the ballast control room, which controls the rig, who was not properly trained. So water broke into the column, into the ballast control room, and the operator didn't know how to do the manual override. So the rig sank, and we lost 84 people. So that's how important. It's fine to say we should have, in our case, we should have had Newfoundlanders on there, but we should have only had Newfoundlanders on there that were trained. And the Royal Commission that went on for about a year after the accident identified the rush to get Newfoundland people out there, but they weren't properly trained. And that should never happen again. Should never happen again. I lost 8 very good friends. And I'm ashamed to say that we, as a government, pushed the oil companies to put people out there for the sake of having Newfoundland people, but they weren't trained.
Wow. That's lesson learned for Guyana.
Oh, lessons learned, I can tell you, as I say, I lost friends, and I shouldn't have lost them. But our guys weren't properly trained, but were trying to achieve Newfoundland content. So you can't sacrifice safety just to say that I got 75% Arguine's content or Newfoundland content. It's not black and white. It's safety is paramount. You don't want a blowout or a fire on board any of your production platforms because you've got poorly trained people. But you push for local content, but only if they're properly trained.
I see.
So it takes a while to develop. I know your government's been looking at it, and you've got a draft now before Parliament, as I understand it. And I think they're learning. I mean, I know from meetings I've had in the early days, I've given them copies of benefits agreements from Newfoundland, and I'm sure they're seeking advice from all over the world. Your new oil commission or oil and gas commission, whatever. Dr. Bino?
I think the Department of Energy.
Department of Energy.
Yes.
I think they're on the right track. They're wide open for ideas and to learn from other jurisdictions. And I think that's a good thing.
For people listening to the show, please feel free to call in the number that's on your screen. We'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have. In addition to creating this policy for local content, there's also been this discussion about sovereign wealth fund, through which the proceeds of the oil revenues will be managed. Does Labrador and Newfoundland have one?
No. Well, we don't have a formal sovereign wealth fund or heritage fund, however you want to call it. Informally, obviously, the revenues, the royalty revenues, come to the province, but not set aside as such. It goes into general revenues, which were used to increase the number of students going to university, the technical capabilities to buy or build simulators. So the money, your sovereign wealth fund, should be used to better educate and increase that level of local content. So I'm hoping that, and again, I live 3,000-4,000 miles away, and I don't profess to be an expert on or and give advice to the government, but your sovereign wealth fund should be used to obviously to improve infrastructure and schools and hospitals and roads and bridges that you need, but also put it into education and training, E&T, and what we call E&T and R&D, research and development, education and training. That's how we spend our revenues from quote unquote sovereign wealth fund.
So there are alternatives to what we have been calling a sovereign wealth fund, which is a very similar situation.
Oh, listen, Norway of all countries in the world, Norway now has 1 trillion US dollars in their sovereign wealth fund. I forget what they call it. And of course, that is also being used or put away for when the oil runs out. So the economy doesn't crash. So, you don't spend it all. The problem is if you spend it all, inflation kicks in and the Dutch disease kicks in. And after 20 years, you're left with nothing. That's no good. It should be tucked away for the people, for the benefit of all people from Guyana, whether they work directly in the industry or they're working in a gold mine in the hinterland, or they're cutting timber up to Berbice or whatever. This is the people's money, so it should be used to benefit the people.
Nice. Yes. Recently, one of the country's leading economists indicated that Guyana can assist residents through annual distribution of oil revenues. Is this done in Labrador, Newfoundland?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
There is a discussion here that maybe the government through the sovereign wealth fund can uh, donate or
Give so
distribute,
much, give a
yeah, a
dividend.
certain amount every year,
Well,
maybe whether it's Christmas time or whenever. Have you guys implemented
no,
systems like that?
no.
Okay.
Alaska has certain jurisdictions. You can't generalize. You can't say if it worked here, it worked there, it worked there.
Sure.
We didn't in Newfoundland. It may have reduced some of our deficit, or it may have paved more roads, or put water and sewer. But nobody wrote me a check at the end of the year from the royalty revenues that we achieved. So it depends on your jurisdiction. I think that from what I've seen so far, there's a need for infrastructure developments, for roads. I think it's money should be put into schools, money should be put into healthcare before you start giving everybody a check. Your infrastructure needs are very important, and I think. And remember, this is the industry for the youth. This is not for you, with due respect. This is not for you. This revenue coming in is for your children and your children's children. So how do you make life better for your children and your children's children? Do you give the check to you, or do you take that money and put it into a school or a university or a hospital or a new highway or water and sewer? That's my humble opinion.
I equate that to an old saying that I've always heard. If society grows great when old men plant trees under which branches they know they should never sit. And I think that this government, through some of the things that they've done, are thinking along those lines. Um, because, as you said, the funds rightfully should be for future generations. I think there will be some benefit for the current population, but if you look to the future, I think it's a lot better in your planning, especially strategic planning, than to be worrying about what we're going to do with the funds now. But I guess overall, the planning has to be in place now
Oh,
so
very
that
much so.
it facilitates that. Um, from past experience, what were some of the challenges that Labrador and Newfoundland companies faced when they attempted to partner with other companies, especially companies that were from outside of the area?
Oh, we were probably a little better prepared than Guyana is. But I think the challenge for Guinea's companies, and I never know whether it's Guineas or Guyanese.
Guyanese.
Guyanese. Well, I
Guyanese
apologize.
companies. Not a
I
problem.
apologize for all these references to Guinea. Guyanese companies. The biggest challenge is understanding the industry. Nobody is, whether it's Exxon or Noble or Stena, no one's going to give you a contract because you're a Guyanese company. They'll give you a contract because you understand the industry and you've got training and you think safely and you think about documentation and control. That's the biggest challenge I see. And I've visited several of your companies over the last 4 or 5 years, and people have to want, you'd say, man, this is technical business. You're out in the middle, 140 miles out in the middle of the Caribbean, and you're taking 140,000 barrels of oil out of the ground, and you're re-injecting gas in it to maintain reservoir. This is not a cakewalk. This is technical. So I think the biggest challenge is understanding the industry and making sure you're properly trained, and you, as I say, you think in a safe way and an efficient way and a responsible way, because nobody wants another accident. There's been too many accidents in our business. The Ocean Ranger that I talked about earlier, 84 lives. The Piper Alpha in Scotland, 230 lives, and the other major one was an accident in Norway in the 70s. And nobody wants that to happen. Nobody wants operators, governments, contractors. Nobody wants disasters. So it's got to be done safely. And as I say, safety is Exxon's mantle. I know of a company in Newfoundland that does stuff, warehousing for Exxon. And boy, every time you look, there's a message up there. Do it safe. If you can't do it safe, don't do it. Go back to your supervisor and say, what you're asking me is not safe. Don't do it. So I think that's critical, and I know, as I say, Exxon feels the same way about it. It's got to be done right, but it's got to be done safely.
It's critical. I mean,
Well, you would know from your marine experience.
absolutely. I've been part of some of those accidents. Closer to home, in '79, there was an accident off the coast of Trinidad and Tobago, which is now recorded as the fourth largest oil spill in the world, and it's very close. So it is actually something that we need to pay particular attention to.
Well, environmentally, I mean, we haven't touched on that, but you take deep. What was the rig in the Gulf for
Deep
BP?
Horizon.
Deep Horizon.
Yeah.
Look at the impact that had on the fishing community in Louisiana, on the tourist business in Florida. So you have to respect the environment, and I sense in Guyana sort of a move towards sort of a green. And people say, how can I have an oil industry and a green economy? And I say it's easy, because you make sure that the oil industry does it safely and is very conscious of the potential for an oil spill, and therefore tourism can work alongside oil and gas. And one of the classic examples, Andy, is some of the largest fabrication yards in Norway. And they're right next to a yacht club or a sailing club, and they work side by side. There's a town in Newfoundland where there's a dock, a supply base, right next to a whale watching operation.
Wow.
So they can work together. But as I say, the last thing in the world anybody wants is another Deepwater Horizon where pollution happens.
Yeah, we certainly don't want that here.
And I watched the movie, and the movie was a bit frightening as to why that accident happened.
Yep.
And I think we all, both operators, both contractors, and society in general, recognize that it should never happen again. So you have an inquiry and you develop a whole new set of procedures. In that case, I think it was the cementing operation. The seal in the casing wasn't properly set. Well, that should never happen again.
What type of short and long-term changes should we as a people be looking for? I mean, I know things happen pretty quickly, but how do we know whether we're getting to the right place or not? Uh, are there
Very difficult for an outsider to answer that question. I think what you should look out for, what you should look for is a responsible development, not rushed. It's got to be done properly, safely, environmentally conscious. You should look, it's a long-term business. You should look at, your educational institutions, to your children to find it. I mean, your fields here, I'm just guessing, but your fields here are probably going to last 20, 25 years by the time you deplete. And remember, you're in Guyana, we're just scratching the surface. You've got the Staybrook block, but then you have other oil companies on both sides of it. So I think it's going to go on a long, long time. Because as I say, you can't fly an airplane on wind or solar. You can't make plastic out of wind or solar. So yes, we're trying to get away from a carbon-based economy, but it's going to be a very long, long time. BP puts out a publication every year, and they talk about 2040, 2050 before we start seeing a decline in the demand for oil. So it's a long-term endeavor to you have to look forward to, and can be a very pleasant one, I might add.
Yeah, I definitely believe that. I think that we we need to prepare for this, and it will take some time. But I do believe that we have the right people in the right agencies to make this happen. Um, there's been ongoing discussion with the Environmental Protection Agency and again the new um, Department of Energy, and there seemed to be some sort of collective agreement that this needs to work for the good of the country, and I see them doing that.
If it doesn't, it shouldn't be done.
Right, correct. I I've also heard there's been ongoing discussion about a refinery in Guyana. Um, in your estimation, from your experience, are we at the point that a refinery is necessary, or should we look at trying to find more oil before we start looking at a refinery?
There's just a surplus of refining capacity. The refinery in Trinidad is just closing down. Refinery in Suriname is very small. Uh, I have a degree in political science. I have no great engineering competency, but no, I don't. I don't. My humble opinion, for what it's worth, is sell the oil to a refiner rather than try to build a refinery. And I think that's, from what I've read, I think that's generally the consensus being talked about in Guyana. Yeah, first when 2015, 2016, when the euphoria of oil, we got all this oil, there was talk of a refinery. But as I say, there's a surplus of refining capacity, even in the neighborhood. You've got that refinery in Trinidad that I'm not sure that someone said there's some discussions going on. But why reinvent another refinery when there's one 450 miles away with capacity, with surplus capacity?
I see. I see. Now, in the petroleum value chain, meaning the upstream, the midstream, and the downstream, which sector do you think Guyana is uh, best developed to enter at this point?
Well, you haven't got a downstream, obviously.
Correct.
You haven't got a midstream. As a matter of fact, you haven't produced a barrel of oil yet.
Correct. Correct.
So obviously, in the upstream and the exploitation of resources, that's at this stage. And you're very young. You're babes in the woods when it comes to oil and gas. I mean, in producing offshore oil and gas. So your immediate place is obviously in the upstream, finding it and producing it, rather than the downstream or the downstream in petrochemical complexes and manufacturing of plastics and things like that. It's way too soon for a country like Guyana, who, as I say, hasn't produced a barrel yet. Now you're going to produce barrels and barrels,
Correct.
but don't put the horse before the cart. I think that's an applicable expression. That's
Absolutely.
very applicable to this situation. Don't start talking about petrochemical complexes and refineries. Concentrate on getting it out of the ground safely.
I see. I see. Some people have been advising. In Guyana, we've got quite a few people who have the academic credentials to visit other countries, get into the oil sector, have the money to do those things, and then there's quite a large population that cannot afford to just go to another country and study these things. They're looking at opportunities developing within Ghana, technical opportunities like welding and things like that. Can you share with us some of those types of skills that will be needed that doesn't require you to travel outside of Guyana?
It's very difficult, obviously. In some case, simulators can fill that gap. We have in Newfoundland, we have a couple simulators. And so somebody can sit in the chair and simulate the operation. Nothing better than doing the actual operation. But the use of simulation is one method. And whether or not and again, I don't profess to tell the government what to do by any means. But is there any way of sort of International Development Bank and American Development Bank? Is there any way of the government borrowing against future revenues? Because we know government's going to get revenues through all the regimes and the equity positions. But if they borrow against that, can they use that money to take, as I said earlier, I mean, I'd love to see 20 or 30 Guyanese business people come up to Newfoundland and spend a week or 2 or 3. I'd love to. And that's one of the ways you can do it. How, the financing is the issue. I hear that every day. I can't afford to do this. I can't afford to do that. But maybe government can borrow against future revenues, not just to pay down debt, but to actually use in training and technology transfer.
Have you guys done that?
We did it in the early
Newfoundland?
days. Yeah. We did it in the early days. We didn't have any money in Newfoundland. Newfoundland's always been the poorest part of Canada. But we used what little bit of money we had and what bit of money we could borrow to train. And the government subsidized us, I remember, from the early 80s. We used to go over to Norway or Scotland, and the government would give us 50% of our airfare and pay us $150 a day to go towards our expenses. And I remember that's how we learned. So I had to, obviously, or companies had to put some of their own money in, but it certainly helped. So that was a program that worked very successfully in Newfoundland and got us to where we are now.
I see. You're here for a few more days. What are your plans here, and what do you hope to accomplish over the next few days here in Guyana?
Well, I have competition in my business interests, so I'm not sure I want to share.
I see. Fair enough.
I'm talking to various businesses about potential for joint ventures, transferring technology. I mean, we in Canada, this mission, we're not here to take all our people, come down, work here. We may take our top people for training, but there's no danger of anybody on this mission bringing 50 people from Canada down to work. Again, it doesn't make sense, and it's got to make sense. So, no, don't expect to see 50 Newfoundland welders down here next month. It just doesn't make any sense. Maybe expect to see one or two welding foremen down here teaching and transferring the technology. But no, as much as I love your country, I love the climate. Remember, I live in a place where icebergs float by, so I can't wait to come back and merge, which is our worst season.
It's a beautiful place to be. And
It is, and I'm particularly enjoying it because I was here from day one. Now, I'll probably be dead and buried by the time you reach that level of prosperity, but just to witness it is just it's a wonderful feeling.
Rob, let me thank you for taking time from your busy schedule to share this wealth of knowledge with Guyanese. We hope you continue to visit us and will join us again here on Safe TV Channel 2 on your next trip. We also urge you to continue sharing your knowledge with the Guyanese public as you have done in the past and are doing here again tonight. I know I speak for quite a few Guyanese when I say at this juncture in our entry into the market, we need another 100 Rob Strongs to make this work. For the public at large, please join us again next Wednesday on Safe TV Channel 2 at 8 p.m. for another edition of A Changing Guyana, where the change you seek begins with you. Our special guest will be the Managing Director of Matt Powell Institute, and she will have some critical information about the changes her organization is making to help Guyanese find jobs and prepare for the new oil and gas sectors. If you would like to obtain more information about this show tonight or any of the other shows, feel free to join us or look at Facebook, our Facebook page, AMES GUYANA. We are also looking for advertisers or sponsors for our show. Uh, you have questions about the services we provide, you can visit our office at 118 Common Street in Kingston or call us at 227-2179, 621-5925, or my personal cell, 661-2828. You can also, as I said before, post a message to our Facebook page at Ames Guyana. Have a good night, Guyana. Thank you. Thank you, Rob.